the Advisory Council of Managing Agents of the BRI had a very, very well-attended meeting that covered the recent enforcement actions associated with the Fair Labor Standards Act. Matt Persanis, our guest speaker this evening, one of our guest speakers, delivered a very timely presentation and a very important presentation. And that presentation is important to all employers. So, accordingly, we are repeating Matt's presentation from January 18th because, again, there are critical components involved with the recent enforcement actions of the federal officials related to the Fair Labor Standards Act. Matt is no stranger to our association. He is Chief Labor Counsel to the Building and Realty Institute and all of its affiliate organizations. Matt has served, and it's hard to believe that time's going so quickly, but Matt has served for more than 20 years as our association's lead negotiator in our labor contract negotiations with Local 32BJ Service Employees International Union, which, as you all know, is also known as the SEIU. He is a principal of Elefante and Persanis of Eastchester, and he is most definitely well known in our region for his expertise in labor issues. Matt will cover the recent enforcement actions related to the FLSA and all of those ramifications of those actions to all employers, again, across the board. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Matt Persanis.
Good evening, thank you. What I found most coincidental is, what many people don't know is, Jimmy Durante's son is my father. No, thank you. I think what we've already learned tonight is that whenever I go anywhere, I'm going to have Jeff introduce me, because it always makes me sound really good. So thanks, Jeff. What we're here to talk about is Fair Labor Standards Act and the New York labor law, which coincides with that. To give you an idea, in 2012, in the Southern District of New York, which is the federal court that covers Westchester and 4 of the 5 boroughs, there were 89 Fair Labor Standards Act cases filed in the entire year. In 2015, which is the last year they had a full accounting, there were 890. It's an incredible increase in the number. The act is not new, but all of a sudden it's hit the radar amongst attorneys as easy money. And why is it easy money? Because frankly, employers are easy pickings. I often joke, people come into my office to talk about a Fair Labor Standards Act, and I do the defense. And I'll point out my window and I'll say, I can go down that strip of stores across the street from me, and I bet you I can pick out 5 to 10 Fair Labor Standards Act claims. Why is that? Because the law is very hard to deal with, and it's very slanted against employers. If you lose in a Fair Labor Standards Act $1, if they find after investigation that you mispaid by $1, the attorney for the plaintiff gets all his attorney's fees paid for. I've been involved in so many cases, and judges are telling me this now, where the recovery for the man or woman who's the claimant is $10,000, $15,000, but the attorney's fees are $45,000, $55,000, $60,000. It's been bad enough, or good enough, depending on what side you're on, that about a year and a half ago there was a case called Cheeks, and they are now requiring attorneys to justify their attorney costs and fees. That had never been done. They're still giving them a liberal wand. They cut a wide swath, but you get the idea. If the federal government needs to act and the judges need to act, then you get an idea that this is a pretty bad thing. So let's get into it. Minimum wage in New York. As of the turn of the year, large employers in New York City, which is 11 or more employees, it's $11 an hour. New York City, for less than 11 employees, it's $10.50 an hour. Westchester County and Long Island, it's $10 an hour. At the end of the year, that's going to go to $13, $12, and $11. And it will go up the following year again by another $2. So the first thing you need to make sure is you're paying minimum wage. That's the most basic. You're not just paying minimum wage for 40 hours, but you're paying time and a half for any hours worked over 40 in a week. Who's covered by the Fair Labor Standards Act? In short, almost everybody. They've increased and they've expanded the law to reach everywhere. And even if you're not covered by the federal law, you will be covered by the state law. Do you do business, interstate business, of $50,000? Who do you buy your oil from? Who do you buy supplies from? Who do you buy natural gas from? Anything. Who pays if you're a cooperative, do you have anybody from out of state paying maintenance, condominium, their charges, owners paying from out of state? All those will be added up. And if it's more than $50,000 in interstate commerce, you're going to be covered by the Act. Anyone who has oil, you probably cover it right there. Gas, there is some natural gas in New York State, but you're probably going to be covered. It's governed by the federal government. It's regulated. They're going to say that's the long arm of the law. So I think some of the basics you need to talk about. Employees need to be paid for all the hours they work. When I was young and I worked hourly jobs, they used to have what they called comp time. Not sure if anyone remembers that, but I liked it. You'd work late on Wednesday night, and on Friday you'd go home at noon. When I was 17, 18, 19, 25, 30, it was great. I'm out of here on Friday, see ya. It's illegal. And the reason it's illegal is, for every hour that you worked in overtime, you need to be paid an hour and a half. And oftentimes that comp time would say, work an hour on Wednesday night, and you can go home an hour early on Friday. That's not an hour and a half. That's an hour. So you need to watch that. Buildings, how many of you just think about it, you don't have to show your hands. How many of you have a superintendent, a porter, a handyman, a doorman who says, hey, I'll stay a little bit late to help you clean up that, the salt that was spilled. I'll help you roll up the rugs that you put out for rain, or I'll come in a little early to roll out the rugs or shovel. And you say, oh, that was great. Thanks for coming in. What time did you get here? Oh, 2 hours early. Oh, just go home 2 hours early. It's illegal. You can't do it. You can do it, but you better pay them. Yes?
I just don't understand. Is it because it's 9 to 5? Or do you calculate at the end of the week or the end of the day?
So for Fair Labor Standards Act, it is how many hours over 40 in a week?
In a week?
Yep, not a day.
If he comes in 2 hours early and leaves 2 hours earlier, why doesn't that even out?
So the reason is, you got to look at his scheduled hours. If he's normally scheduled to work 9 to 5, and you say, can you come in on a special event at 7, but then you take away the 2 hours, let's say, at the end of the day or on Friday, what the courts have found is that's the equivalent of comp time. And you're taking hours away to adjust his schedule, and in essence, you're working the system to cheat him.
Wow.
So you can't do it. But yeah, I got you.
You got to pay a pound and a half.
Right. Correct. So when can you deduct? Well, deductions from pay are illegal. When are they not illegal? And I've seen this, and I've kind of limited these to our industry. And when are deductions from pay not illegal? Well, we all know that there's support, child support, that can get taken. There's garnishments for any judgments. But also, sometimes you have to have the employee or a government agency's permission. Whether it's a government telling you to do it, a court order, a judgment, or the employee is asking you. Some of your employees, if they're union, which if you're in the BRI, most of them are, they have a PAC. Some of them may belong to. Just make sure you have the paperwork. When can you not? What's an illegal deduction? The employee loses the hammer, and you say you're going to pay for that hammer. And you go out and you buy a $15 hammer, and you take it out of his pay. You can't do it. When else, you got a fine. He didn't put the garbage out early enough. He left the garbage out late. He put it out too early. The building gets fined. I've seen this in the past where the employers have said, you're in charge of fines. If you get fined, you're paying them. No, it's your fine. It's not his fine. He works for you. You had a question?
And just going along with the gentleman next to me asked, what if you have a staff member who says to you, listen, Christmas Day or New Year's Day or one of the holidays, I'll work, I'll stay in my apartment, I'll cover the building. I may not necessarily work the full 8 hours, but you don't have to worry, the building will be covered. And then will you give me that day as a vacation day later on in the summer if I want to tack it on to some of my other vacation days?
Get it in writing that it's his request. And you're going to have to mark it as 8. And I'm about to just get into that subject, which is good timing.
Don't mean to get ahead of you.
Yeah. So in our industry, there's a lot of times when men aren't actively working, particularly superintendents, but they're waiting. They're on call, or there's just X amount of work in a day, and they're kind of waiting for something to happen. And when you have a good superintendent, you're okay with that. It's when you don't that you get angry. And what's waiting time? Well, it's counted as hours worked when the employee is unable to use the time effectively for his or her own purposes, and the time is controlled by the employer. So if you tell that employee, you're on call, you need to stay in the office and wait, he can't use his time effectively. In essence, you own those hours. You're going to have to pay him. And the argument I always get is, but he didn't do anything. That's your choice. That wasn't his choice. He had to sit and wait for a call. That's no different than a receptionist in an office. They have to sit and wait for a call. When is it not counted? Well, obviously when he's relieved from duty and is free to go about his day and do whatever he wants, or the time isn't long enough that you would run into a problem. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, you say, can you hang on a minute and just wait? That's fine. On-call time, that's a big issue in our industry. Why do we have live-in superintendents? We want them so they can answer emergencies. What do we do? Well, I can tell you what our contract says. Our contract, VRI contract with 32BJ, says the employee has to be available before or after the workday. So if he works Monday to Friday, we've always said, okay, 12:01 Monday morning, he has to be available until 11:59 Friday night. But you have to be careful about what you think is available. Available doesn't mean sitting by his phone, dressed, ready to work. Because then we have to go back to, can he use his time effectively? No. He's trapped sitting by the phone. Whether it's in his office or whether it's at his phone in his apartment. He's trapped. On-call time, when he has to stay at the employer's premises, so you have a non-live-in and you're requiring him to be on premises. If you've required him to be on premise, it's payable time. Pay him. Employee has to stay close to the business, and he can't use that time for his own. Well, we talk about this sometimes. I get these questions. An on-call superintendent, can he go to the movies? Yeah. If he lives in Yonkers, he can go to the Cross County and go to the movies. He better have a phone on him, or years ago it used to be a beeper. But he can go to the movies, but he may have to leave that movie. That's the risk he takes. Can he go shopping? Yeah. Can he go shopping at Stu Leonard's in Stamford? Probably not. Can he go to the movies in Albany? No. What we always say is, if he can be back in a reasonable amount of time, then you're okay. What's reasonable? That's a good question. We've kind of come to the litigation. We've litigated this issue with the union, and we've always said 45 minutes is probably a good measure. If you can be back at the building in 45 minutes, that's probably a safe time. The courts have found 45 minutes is safe, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. No, you're still controlling him. If you're demanding that he has to be reporting back in 10, 15 minutes, you in essence are still controlling his time. 45 minutes, I think you're safe for now. If you require him to carry a cell phone and answer it, that's okay. You're not going to be charged for all that time he's carrying it. A beeper was the same thing. I don't think there's beepers anymore. Answer text, that's fine. If he's required to leave word at home where he is, and that somebody at home can get a hold of him, and how he can be reached, that's fine too. That's not controlling his whereabouts, that's just asking where he is, and you're okay with that. Meal and rest periods. Meal period. If you're going to give him a half an hour or an hour, our contract calls for an hour. I know there's all kinds of changes to that, I'll call them. Variations on that. Half an hour, as long as he's free to do what he wants during his hour of lunch or dinner time, you're not going to pay him. Those 5, 10, 15-minute breaks, you're going to pay him. He can't leave the premises. He's really trapped. You know, he's taking a break to go to the bathroom. He's taking a break to sit down for 10 minutes. You can't count that against him. That's payable time. He's not in control of his time. Overtime pay. They have to receive 1.5 times their basic rate of pay for every minute they work past 40 in a week. Each work week stands alone. So if he worked 35 last work week, you can't have him work 45 this week and say, hey, I'm catching you up from last week. It goes in 52 segments in the year, and you have to look at each one. You can't manipulate his regular rate of pay. So for 10 years, your person has earned $10 an hour. All of a sudden he works some overtime, and you come out and say, well, you're only earning $9 an hour this week. That's not going to fly. Everyone sees through that. Payments other than hourly rates, a bonus, watch yourself. I've seen employers, they'll give a bonus. And then they'll say, when they get caught not paying overtime, they'll say, well, that bonus I gave was the payment. You better do your math, and you better hope that that payment winds up to the penny. Because otherwise, it's not going to be. Everyone's going to see through it, and they're going to know what it is. Deductions, same idea. You better watch out for those deductions that we talked about. As I said, each work week stands alone. You can't borrow from one work week to the next. And the work week is 7 consecutive 24-hour periods. And that's going to become important later on, because you're going to have to tell on a paycheck what the work week is. So record keeping. The biggest issue in the Fair Labor Standards Act for employers is the lack of record keeping. And again, I'm not going to ask you to raise your hands because I don't want to embarrass anybody. But who here has time records for their superintendents, porters, handymen, doormen? They're accurate time records that you make your employees sign in and sign out and sign their name at the end of each week and hand it in. You don't have to answer me. If you don't, you could be in trouble. As an attorney, if I was representing the employee, I'd love it. Why? Because the Fair Labor Standards Act is a strange law. In any other law, if I bring a suit as a plaintiff, I have to prove my case. I have to prove it by a preponderance of the evidence. I'm the one who has the burden to prove that you harmed me. Fair Labor Standards, the first burden is on the employer. The burden is on the employer to produce time records. Time records that are accurate and complete. What time did he start? What time did he leave? Did the employee acknowledge that time? Was the employee aware of this time record? Did the employer keep that time record for 6 years? If the answer to any of those questions is no, that time record is not going to relieve you of your burden. And what the courts have allowed is an employee's recollection can be counted as proof of the time worked. I'll give you a fantastic example of somebody who walked into my office and said, I just got this in the mail. It's a Fair Labor Standards Act case. And they said, we had 2 guys in our store. One guy worked 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. The other guy we would hire here and there when we had to unload a truck. It was a very small store. And he said, we would hire this guy. He was a friend of our other guy. We'd pay him $20 an hour to unload our truck. When the truck was done unloading, we'd say, thanks, pay him in cash, and gone. What does the case say? The case says the first guy, the real employee, worked 70 hours a week, every week. They also say his buddy worked 70 hours a week, every week. Did they have time records? No. It was a husband, a wife, one employee. They had no time records. Part of the time they paid him in cash. When things were tight, they paid the employee in cash. They didn't want to not pay him. They paid him in cash, didn't keep records. there's almost no defense to this. We're scrambling like mad. The burden is fully on them. What are the two men going to say? They're going to say, hey, how many hours did you work? I worked 70. How many did you work? I worked 70. Disprove it. They're going to win the case unless we can disprove it, which is the exact opposite of every other case, because in most cases you have to prove your case. You know, in a regular lawsuit, you could sit back and do nothing and still win if they haven't proved their case. As an employer, the burden is on you to prove your case. And if you don't have those time records, you're going to lose. I know I'm harping on it, but it's really onerous and it's really true. Yes?
Would you rather we wait till the end?
Yeah, if you don't mind.
That's fine.
Thank you. So what do you have to keep in terms of record keeping? The FLSA requires employers to keep records on wages, hours, and other items specified in the Department of Labor record-keeping regulations. There you go. Everyone got that? Right? That's great. You know, that's a great answer, right? That's a perfect non-answer answer. And, you know, you walk away from going, oh, that's great. What do I have to do? Well, you need personal information. Employee name, home, address, occupation, sex, birth date, if they're under 19. Have that somewhere. The hour and the day when the work week begins. So if your work week begins on Sunday and runs to Saturday, somewhere on a timesheet it should say that. Somewhere it should say work day, work week starts, work week ends. You need to have the total hours worked each day and each work week. So my favorite is take a sheet, put week starting, week ending, employee's name, hang on, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Write down what time you got there, what time you left, each day. That's your safest bet. The next thing is the total daily or weekly straight time earnings. So when you have a week that somebody has overtime, you need to differentiate. You can't just give one lump sum on that pay stub. You need to differentiate between how much did he earn straight time, and it better match the other weeks, and how much extra earnings did he have in overtime that week. And that's an important one because often employers miss that, and you can get banged on that one. You need the regularly hour rate of pay when any work overtime is worked. You also need the total overtime pay for the work week. Any deductions or addition from wages has to be on there. The total wages paid each pay period, and the date of payment and that time period it's covering. So it's important to know, again, what day does this week start, what does it end, and delineate every item about what are you getting paid for. How many hours did you work? How much are you getting straight time? How much are you getting overtime? How much hourly are you getting straight time? How much hourly are you getting on overtime? Someone had a question.
Matt,
Yes?
Not to interrupt my two colleagues here who have
Well, you
questions.
will.
But is it better for you to finish your presentation and then take questions? How do you-
Yeah, I think it is.
All right,
It
so
won't
why
be-
don't-
yeah.
You know, you're on a roll. So why
I don't have that much longer.
I'll try to contain these two here at the table.
Beat 'em down.
The rest of you are on your own, but let's wait until Matt finishes and then we'll start with my
Sure.
first.
So the enforcement of the FLSA and its legal remedies. What can happen? Well, they can bring a lawsuit. They can go to the Department of Labor and have the Department of Labor enforce it against you. We're seeing a move away from that, and the reason is, as I said at the beginning, 89 in 2012, 890 in 2015. There's a lot of attorneys looking for these. It's easy money. You know, think about those things I read off, and think about your employee's pay stub. Does it have all that? If not, let me know your employee's name. I'd like to make some money. But, you know, and the idea of, I've had people say to me, but I don't do my own payroll. I use paychecks, or I use whoever. They're not the employer. It's your problem, not theirs. On the Fair Labor Standards, so I talked about there's the dollar. For every dollar you didn't pay them, they're going to get their back wages. There's liquidated damages. So they're going to double. For every dollar that they find in damage, they're going to double that dollar. So you're going to pay, it's a 2-for-1 deal. You're going to pay their attorney's fees and costs. You're also going to possibly be fined. If they think you did this on purpose, or you were so lazy, relaxed about your record keeping that it would have been on purpose, you're going to get hit with a penalty. And it's up to $10,000. There is personal liability. This is one of the few laws where they can pierce the corporate veil. So the idea of, hey, I own my building in an LLC, and the LLC is, my building's not worth that much. I got a mortgage to the Hilton. That's great. But I hope you like your house. Because they're going to come after it. About a month ago, I was representing an employer, and I was talking to the attorney for the plaintiff. And I said, look, it's a really small place. They don't have a lot of money. They're actually going out of business. And it was a pizza place. And I said, you can check. I said, look on Craigslist. The pizza place has been for sale. There's some other website where you sell businesses. I said, look there, it's been on sale for a year. They've got no takers. They'd love to get out. And the attorney said to me, he goes, how's their house in Scarsdale? I said, I was like, all right, I know where we are. And he wasn't really joking. So how are you going to leave here and go protect yourself? I've scared the crap out of you. So how am I going to save you? Well, you're going to save yourself. You're going to go back and you're going to design a timesheet. It does not have to be complicated. As I said, I always like to tell people, you remember those Marvel notebooks? Right? Albert, I know you remember those. If you remember Durante, you remember Marvel notebooks.
And before the marvel was granted.
Yeah. So have the employee put the date, the day on each page, have him fill in the time he got there, the time he left, and sign the bottom of the page. That'll work. It's not the classiest looking thing, but it'll work. Just make sure you collect that book. When that book gets filled up, collect it. I think a better way is have your employees fill out daily timesheets, and they have to give them to you signed by them at the end of each week. And you're going to keep them for 6 years, right? Yeah. So you got to do that. Now, one of the things I hear about a lot, and I've had a few of these recently, which is kind of interesting. I have a workout super. Does anyone remember a workout super? Super would work in a building. He wouldn't get paid, but he'd work part-time. Usually it's in a small building, 60 units or less usually. He would go about take out the garbage, do some small repairs. Anything bigger, they'd bring in someone. But the super would go about cleaning the building, taking out garbage, and in return, he'd get to live there for free. That's illegal. You're not paying. And you say, well, I want an offset for the price of the apartment. Two things are going to go against you. New York law and federal law have all determined that that employee is living there for your purposes, not his. It's your convenience to have an employee living on premises, not his or hers. Whether you think you're doing a nice job, whether that employee begged to live there, whether that employee came up to you and said, hey, I don't want any money, just give me a nice apartment, I'll live here, I'll take care of your building for you. Don't do it. You had one today. He now claims he worked 70 hours a week and wants to get paid. What's your proof you didn't? You don't have it. Did you pay him overtime? No. Did you pay him straight time? No. What offset can you get for that apartment? You are allowed an offset. You are allowed an offset at the rental value of his apartment in 1975. Yes, 1975. Don't ask me why. At some point, the law was written and never updated. And when they go to do an offset, they'll say, okay. Again, the burden is on you to prove what the rental value was. If your building wasn't built in 1975, guess what? It didn't have a rental value. If you don't have the records from 1975, guess what? You're getting no write-off. Even if you do, an average 2-bedroom apartment in White Plains in 1975, how much are we talking about? $200 a month? It's not a huge write-off. So it's a problem. And don't depend on that. Other things you can use as an offset. Do you pay for his cell phone? Do you pay for his gas and electric? Do you pay for his cable? Do you pay for his phone? Keep records. If you get trouble, at least you're not going to have to double pay that. At least you can get some sort of offset for that. If you give bonuses, even to employees that you didn't pay, keep track of that. You can use that as an offset for someone who doesn't get any pay. you just have to keep records. If you hear me, I'm harping on it. The records, it's the record, stupid. That's really the gist of this speech. So what about an employee who you do pay, but maybe he only works part-time? There's a minimum wage you need to pay. There's a law in New York for janitors. And janitors our superintendents, our porters, have been considered janitors under our law. We always think of janitors, or at least I do, somebody who works, in a school or somebody, not necessarily a residential janitor. We've always called them, in our industry, superintendents, porters, handymen, doormen. You say janitor, it doesn't come to your mind. Well, under the law, janitor could be any one of those job titles. And under the law, as of December 31, 2015, the unit rate, they have a unit rate, which changes every year. So based on your number of units, you better be paying that rate. Or, more importantly, they have a minimum. And that minimum is $382.80 per week. So whether this person works, let's say you comply with the Fair Labor Standards Act. You have a guy, and he only works 10 hours a week for you. And that's all you need. It's not going to, you pay him $10 an hour. At the beginning, I told you what minimum wage was. You're good minimum wage-wise. But you're not good under New York law. Because you're not paying $382. You're paying $100. And you're going to turn to me and you're going to say, I paid him $10 an hour for the 10 hours he worked. And we're in agreement he only worked 10 hours. Okay, that's great. But the minimum is $382.80 a week. You owe him $280.82. So how else can you save yourself? Well, under the BRI contract, if you're living up to the BRI contract, you'll be safe. If you follow the rules in that, you'll be good. But watch yourself. Keep good records. I know I keep saying that. Have your employees sign their timesheet, so when they come back and they sue you, you can at least defend yourself and put the onus back on them. Because even though the onus is on you, that burden shifts back to the employee if you produce time records. If you can produce even basic time records, the employee must now overcome that record. And now what the courts have been deciding is his mere testimony is no longer enough. He's going to have to provide some proof. And that's going to get very hard for him. Pay by check. I know a lot of small mom and pops like to pay by cash. The amount you're going to save in payroll tax is not going to be enough when you get sued. Pay by check. And at last, please pay the minimum wage. It's rather there. And the last thing, actually, it wasn't last. What I'll often hear employers come to me and they'll say, well, you know what, I didn't pay a minimum wage, but don't worry about it. I'll say, okay. Maybe I don't want to hear this. I'll take care of it. And they say, well, he's illegal. And I'll say, do you really want to bring that up in court? And they'll say, what do you mean? I'll say, well, it's a $1,000 a week fine by the Department of Labor. Do you want to inform them? And they say, but he's illegal. I'll say, but the burden's on you. You're the employer. Have him fill out an I-9. If you didn't do it, you're the one in trouble, not him. Might change under the new regime, but at least for now, they're going to go after the employer, not after the employee. They might go after both. So that's not a good defense. Just because you're illegal, it doesn't mean you get to rip them off and work them like slaves. Questions?
Yes.
Yes.
Does this pertain to salaried employees?
Depends on your.
Repeat the question.
Yeah, so the question is, does it apply to salaried employees? In our industry, nobody that works for us is going to be determined to be exempt. In fact, last year, they raised the exemption level. It had been $50,000. Off the top of my head, it's a brand new amount. I believe it's now $70,000. So if they earn less than $70 a year, they're not going to be exempt. It's also under what type of job. And, salaried employees, what I think you're getting at is what they call exempt. There are certain jobs that are exempt, like an attorney, a doctor, some paralegals. You're seeing different cases on these now. They're exempt employees. What does that mean? They have a certain job and a certain level of autonomy. managing agents are probably exempt. They have a level of autonomy that you're not counting what time they come in and leave. You just want real estate agents, you know? You don't have jobs. You're working all the time. And, you know, I think the deal is if you're telling them what time they have to be there and what time they can leave, they're not exempt. If you're counting their hours, if they cannot take a half day and you don't care, they're not exempt.
On the payroll stuff, when it asks the employee's address, is the post office box good enough?
If that's what the employee gives you, I don't like, sorry. On the employee stub, if they give you a P.O. box, is that good enough? You know, I don't have any case law on that, but I would say no, because the law says you're supposed to have an address. At some point, they need to fill out an I-9, a W-2. They've got to give you an address at some point. And that's when you got to take it. Take it from there. Yes, sir.
Does this apply to independent contractors at all?
Good question. Does this apply to independent contractors? Depends on the definition of independent contractor. Obviously, when things started to heat up in this realm, everybody said, I'm not hiring any employees, I'm hiring all independent contractors. You know, Matt, you've been our superintendent for the last 10 years. You're no longer our employee, you're now an independent contractor. Okay, great. What's that mean? Well, I'm going to pay you the same. You got to be here on time. You can't leave till I tell you. You're still using our tools. You're living in our apartment. I'm not an independent contractor. You can say whatever you want. And even getting me to sign a paper that says I'm an independent contractor, it's not going to work. What is indicative of an independent contractor? Do I serve many masters? That's actual case law. You know, do I have more than one client? If you're my only client, I'm not an independent contractor. Do I have many clients? That's indicative. Do you pay me on a 1099 or do you pay me in a payroll check? That's indicative. It's not the only thing. There's 10 items. These are the big ones, so I'll give you the biggies. Am I free to do the job whenever I feel? So just like a contractor, you know, who's going to build your house, there's a parameter of when you want it built, but you don't tell him show up at 9, leave at 5. You wish you could, but you don't. You know, he's going to show up when he feels like it, and he's going to leave all the time. But really, he controls. He might go to another job on the day you thought he was going to do it. He's free to do what he wants. He brings his own tools. There are no building tools. He has his own tools, and he takes them with him when he leaves at the end of the day. He may even subcontract the work to someone else. Is he free to do that? Those are things that are more indicative of independent contractor status, as opposed to, you know, a lot of people got in a lot of trouble a few years ago saying, independent contractor, they're not. They just wind up getting reamed. Yes.
With regard to that 1975 rent guideline, in 1975, rents increased to 1976, and they increased again in 1977, etc. Why aren't you allowed to incorporate the allowed rent increases for that apartment straight through to 2016? This doesn't make any sense. No. We're talking law. So the first thing you need to do, you need to stop and check any reasonableness at the door. So what I'd like now is everyone to put down reasonableness and just think about law. The law says you can, so you can. Is it just? No. But the law is very rarely about justice, despite what they told me.
You mentioned earlier about the super lives in your building, that you cannot use that as some form of compensation. Can you give some guidance as to what are the best practices when you are providing such, you know, not bonuses, but such facilities for your super? How should it be handled?
Okay, the question is, earlier I said, for superintendents, you can't use the value of the apartment to offset paying minimum wage. Courts have found that, despite what we think and what we'd like to say, the employee is there for your benefit, not their own. So you can't use that against them. And the question is, what's the best practice with that? You know, I think the best practice is you just can't count that value. Let's say, I'll just make a number up to make it easy. Let's say you value that apartment at $1,000 a month. And for, you know, the last whatever number of years, you've had to deal with your employee where you say, well, I'll pay you $2,000 a month to do the job, but I'm going to take back $1,000
for the rent, and I just won't pay you. And you say, well, you know, we both make out because I'm not going to pay you the $1,000, and you're not going to get taxed on that $1,000. So it all works out. It works out for him. And when he sues you, it's going to work out for him. But it's not going to work out for you. So you just can't apply any value to that apartment. What can you expect in exchange for that apartment? You know, because anytime we give something, we want something back. What can we expect in exchange for giving an apartment? You can demand some things. And like I said, you know, if it's a BRI 32BJ contract, we can expect that he's available for emergencies before or after the workday. If he's there on his day off and it's, you know, a fire, smoke, water, police, fire department, and he's available, you can expect him to respond. That's what we get back in value, is that having someone else. The other thing we can get back in value is, I believe it's every municipality, they're all different in terms of the distance, but every municipality in Westchester and all 5 boroughs in New York City require you to have a 24-hour available person. And they all have different amounts of how far away. New York City, I think it's 200 feet, so you could have one person cover 2 buildings. But in essence, in Westchester County, it ranges, every town ranges, but they all require somebody to be there and be available 24 hours. So in essence, you need him there. He's not living there because he likes it. He's living there because he's solving that issue for you. So that's the best practice. Yes?
I have 2 quick questions. One is, I just want to confirm what I think I heard about the superintendent. Just like the porters, it's essential that the superintendent fills out time cards.
Yes.
Correct.
So the question, let me get that one first. Question is it essential that the super, not just the porter, fills out time cards? Yes. Every employee you need to have filling out your time cards.
And he should not be considered to have flexible hours, so that if he works from 7 to 4 and he has to get up for an hour at 5 to do the snow, and that's it, he should put in for 5 to 6, get his overtime, and then 7 to 4.
Correct.
And that's what it should be all the time.
Right. So the question was, for a superintendent, he works 7 to 4, but it's snowing. He gets up at 5, goes out and shovels for an hour, comes back. What should he do? Should he work 7 to 3? No. The amount of problems you're going to have is not worth that half-time rate that you're going to have to pay. You know, it's not time and a half, it's half-time, because it's only the difference. You got to pay him for the hours he works, and you can't cut him back at the back end.
So the other question, it leads into the overtime issue, because you specifically said that the overtime 40 hours was 40 hours worked time, which would mean that if a super works from Monday to Friday, and Monday is a holiday and he takes off, which is not work time, on Saturday, if he has to come in and shovel snow, that would not be over 40 hours work time, so he would not get overtime for that Saturday.
Correct. Now, that is under the Fair Labor Standards Act. Under our contract, the BRI contract, it's more than 8 hours in a day. They get overtime.
That's what I thought.
And holidays are counted as paid time. There's a slight difference. So under the contract, you'd be violating the contract, but that's a lot easier to deal with. If he brings an arbitration, you just pay him his time.
Yeah, so that is the difference between the FLSA.
Correct.
FLSA and
Yeah, that is the difference between the FLSA and the contract.
So you advocating time clock, time sheets? I mean,
Time clocks? I think time clocks are great. You know, they're accurate, they're easily provable. Especially today, there's so many time clocks now that record things via the internet. You know, they don't even have a paper clock, you know, or time like we used to. You know, they use their thumbprint, their eye, whatever. Or even, you know, some have, you get to a phone at the premises and you call in from that phone and it records what time you called in. I understand, you know, our industry is still from times back in a different time, you know, I'll say, in that we're all friends and you know, a lot of your employees live with you. You know, superintendents live, they might be your neighbor, and it's hard to have that cut and hard and fast rule, but you just got to do it, you know. So I do. I advocate time cards. I think they're great.
Matt,
Takes me out of business.
Matt, I'm sorry.
Sure.
We need to cut the question and
Sure.
answer period off here. In the event that there's an insurance issue involving the FLSA, there are options. Pat Clare from Levitt-Fuirst the insurance manager for the BRI and the CCAC will cover those options. The issue came up at our January 18th meeting on this topic. Jason Skishano, Levitt-Fuirst, did research. Pat will now report on the research that Jason did.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. I'm hopefully going to take 2 or 3 minutes of your time. That's it. Wow, Matt scared the heck out of me. And I think one of the most important things he said was the attorney fees are greater than the penalties or payments to the plaintiffs. So if you are a co-op or a condo board and you have a non-profit D&O policy in place with coverage that includes the property manager, I can't speak for every single policy sold in the state of New York, but 95% of them will include defense costs for these particular types of suits. They will not pay fines, back wages, or penalties, but they will provide a defense for you as the employer. So I would check with my broker, make sure you have a D&O policy, nonprofit D&O policy in place, and see if, and ask them or make sure that they provide you with a policy that provides protection for these types of lawsuits for you as employers. Also make sure it includes protection for the property manager in case they are dragged into the suit. They probably will be. And 99% of the time, the contracts that you have with your property management firms require that you indemnify them if they are sued. The best way to do it is via a D&O policy. And that's all I have to say. Oh, thank you. Wow. Sounds like you should keep record.
Non-profit.
Right.
The board itself is not a separate 501c3 within the, how does,
I'm talking about the type of D&O policy that you request. There are for-profit D&O policies, and there are non-profit.
okay, so if you have a co-op board or that's a...
Yes.
I don't care about that. I don't want the
One more question, yes.
I want an attorney defending, and that's what we're going
Co-ops have property managers and lawyers. Whose responsibility is to see that all these steps are followed? Is it the board or is it the property?
It doesn't matter.
The steps as far as the employer, the employees, I would think it's the employer. It's probably more a question for Matt, but my guess would be it's the employer.
We don't know that all the time sheets and everything goes to the property management company.
That's
So
right behind.
the question, just so everyone can hear it. Most co-op condos and even some rentals hire outside management firms. And the question was, who's responsible at the end of the day, since, co-op boards, co-op boards, condo boards, and such don't do this on a regular basis. The real answer to that question is, who owns the building? As the owner, you're ultimately going to be responsible. You may be able to blame somebody else because it was their job, but at the end of the day, you're the one reaching into your pocket to pay.
Thank you very much, Pat. Before I call our special guest who made an extra special effort to be with us tonight, George Latimer, before I call him up, I just want to say that all of this, whether it's labor counsel, insurance advisor, the lobbying we do, my colleague Maggie Collins, our director of membership, she would normally be here tonight, but she's covering an Urban Land Institute build and developer function, actually just down the street on Hamilton Avenue in White Plains. But I would be remiss if I didn't mention the fact that one of the earliest things that resonated with her about what we do is the advocacy on behalf of our members, the advocacy on behalf of all of you, your businesses, your livelihoods, your investments in Westchester County, in real estate, and in your businesses. So I would ask you, in the spirit of membership, all of you have your own circles of influence. All of you have your own circles of business associates, people that you know a great plumber, a great electrical contractor. We already have a great labor lawyer, so we're not asking about that. But the thing is, you all know suppliers, service firms, professionals whom you rely on, whom you know to be good. And those are the people that we ask you to refer to us at the Building and Realty Institute as possible membership prospects. The quality begets quality, and we like to think that good people attract good people. So again, I promised Maggie I would put in a membership pitch. If I didn't, hell has no fury. But seriously, all of you know people, and if you have anyone that you feel might be a good prospect for membership, please let Maggie know, Jeff or myself, and we will make, as we always do, as honest and as good a pitch as we can, because our pitch is really not a sales pitch; it's a pitch for solidarity in this crazy business that we're in, with all the trials and tribulations that we all have to deal with. So on that membership note, I would like to introduce a very special state senator, one of just a few who have really gone to bat for us consistently, who understands the industry, and there's a special connection with Senator Latimer because we both hail, like George Washington, we all come from Mount Vernon. Maybe a slightly different Mount Vernon, but the same place. But anyway, please welcome State Senator George Latimer, a friend of the association.
I'm very cognizant that if I'm the last stop before you get out of here and go home, keep it short and to the point. But Albert asked me to stop by tonight because part of the discussion and the frustration that you're all going through in your various buildings is New York State's inability to accomplish the task of getting rebate checks out. And I have to say at the outset, and I've said this in Albany, and it's been a bipartisan thing, not one party or the other, I think there's a general sense that we have created a mess consciously that we should have avoided creating in the first place. The first thing we did is we decided that there needed to be rebate checks rather than a check-off or some tax deduction that could have been done on the form. A number of us did argue for that at the time. But, I have to tell you what you already know, which is, there is a political mindset that says if you put a check in somebody's hand on October 30th, and the election day is November 7th, that's a nice thing. Now, the problem is that the checks haven't gotten into your hands on October 30th, and here we are now in late February, and we had a public hearing in Albany where we quizzed the Acting Commissioner of Taxation and Finance, and whether it was Assemblyman, Senator, upstate, downstate, Democrat, Republican, whatever the reality was, we were all in singular agreement that the system has failed, and in the act of failing, it's created problems and pressures for people all across the board. There's legislation that my colleague, Senator David Carlucci from Rockland, has filed, and there are some other bills as well, and it has a very simple premise, and the premise is, in a couple of months, on April 15th, we're obliged to pay the New York State Department of Taxation, whatever it is we owe, and we're obliged to pay them on April 15th. If we pay them on April 16th, they'll gratefully take it, and they'll assess a penalty and an interest charge for being a day late, much less 4 to 5 months late, which is the zone that we're in here. And so therefore, the same should apply to the state. The state should be able to pay an interest and a penalty to the person who should have gotten the check on October 30th. Now, obviously, it's an incentive to get the checks out. And I think the executive branch got the message that there's a great degree of unhappiness. But getting the message and getting the checks out are still a problem. And I would also say that in the way the program was constructed, I'm not telling you what you don't know, but the program differed from year to year. The program required the person doing the assessment to know whether any individual unit in their particular jurisdiction had a city council or a village and town board and a county and a school district, all in compliance with the tax cap, and then that they also levied a tax up to the point of that tax cap. It's a relatively complicated calculation. that differs as you go up and down a different area. Let me use my good friend Barry Kramer, who's sitting here in the room. We know that he's the mayor of Garth Road in Eastchester. If you go a block or two north, you've left Eastchester and you've entered Scarsdale. If you're adventurous enough to try to cross the Parkway, which is right outside the back door of his particular co-op, and you cross over, you're in the city of Yonkers. And if you go across that way and then cross Ardsley Road, you're in the town of Greenburgh, just within a baseball throw of where Barry and John live. And then you start to look at what school district and all those complications. So we created a jerry-rigged system out of the desire to do something good, which is rebate money and provide an incentive. We made it complicated, and now we failed to accomplish the task. And I say that straightforwardly because it doesn't benefit any of us in public office to throw the blame in a different direction. It doesn't benefit any of us to blame another political party. We made the mistake, we made it together. You have to acknowledge you made the mistake, and now you're going to fix the mistake. And that's exactly where we are, and I think the legislation that David Carlucci, Albert was there to stand behind him, as did I, will be a step in the right direction. And I would say all of us in the state legislature, you may not believe we believe this, but we want to hear from you that you haven't gotten your checks yet, and then we want to know when you get them. Because that is what we're working on. We're working on individual follow-up on individual situations. So to the extent that you have a relationship with your assembly member, your senator, and if I'm your senator, the information I'll give you in a second, you're welcome to reach out to my office and say, I'm calling on behalf of such and such an address, and we still haven't gotten the checks. And if you want to communicate to the people in your building that, we were at a meeting, the state senator said the state's to blame, and if that gives you a little pressure, because I don't know who's blaming who, sometimes they'll come to the manager of the building and thinking that somehow you're the reason why this thing didn't happen, or you didn't submit information. That's not the case at all, and I'm happy either on a personal level, or you're certainly welcome on my behalf to express to them that this is a mistake that's happened at the level of the New York State government. It was poorly designed, and now we have to correct it. As we go forward, and this kind of morphs into the only other point I wanted to mention to you tonight, so we can get going, is that we're in the middle of the budget process in New York State. The budget is scheduled to close on March 31st, about a month from now. The days of late budgets are functionally over, not because we saw the light, but because there are now structures in place that make it very difficult for us to get a better deal on the budget by holding out, which is why we had 20 years of late budgets. Entity, whether the assembly figured, and you all do negotiations, so you know what it's like. If I hold out and I go into extra innings, I can negotiate a better deal on the budget. Now that's not the case, so March 31st is the close date. And why that matters is that the budget document in New York State is not just a fiscal document, it is also a policy document. It has in it language that shapes how money is to be spent. So from the standpoint of your industry, from the standpoint of the interests that you represent, and some of it may be expressed through some of the New York State associations, not only the local associations, I'm sure they're monitoring the budget. If there are things in the budget that affect you positively or negatively, things you want to keep in the budget, or things you think ought to be out of the budget, this is the time to communicate with those of us in the state legislature that represent you. If there's an interest that involves you as a realtor, if it's an interest that involves you from a pure real estate standpoint, this is the time, email, whatever is the convenient method for you to reach out to any of us. Tell us this provision should be in, this provision should be out. Negotiations, sad to say, happen behind closed doors. They do not happen in an open public forum. Any of us who, in our respective parties, are in the minority, don't necessarily know the progress of it, but it's our responsibility to try to find out. So if there is something of that magnitude, certainly Albert and his group will serve as a conduit for you. And look, it's not a pretty scene in Albany, but we have to work to make it better. We can't give up on it. And what's happening in Washington, there may even be more unknowable things in the next, was that a nice way to phrase it? There are more unknowable things to happen over the next 6 to 8 months. And we're just going to have to figure out how to deal with that. And we'd be a lot better off if we have a dialogue with you guys on it, so we know how it affects you. So that's what I wanted to share. I don't know if you want me to take questions. If you do, I'm not going to be as good as Matt. I mean, he's an intellectual ninja holding off on a question.
An intellectual ninja. Is that still here?
It's not trademarked, so you can use it. Tell us.
We can take some questions. ask is that, if you have a question for Senator Latimer, stand up, identify yourself, and if you're with a co-op or on a board, whatever, or you're a realtor, whatever, so that George knows. So yes, Kathy.
Thank you, George. Kathleen Jensen Graham, Hilltop Terrace, New Rochelle. I'm concerned mostly with the STAR rebate checks, the tax-freeze credit checks. We know from last year are notoriously late for co-ops. I don't understand the legislation that required that we would go state to property owner, and what the significance, I don't see where the tax savings is on it, where the savings to the state is. On the local levels, we still have to have STAR coordinators, so there's no savings on the local level. And it doesn't seem to be working, and for me, because we're a self-managed co-op, on the front lines, I see our newer property owners, instead of getting the STAR credit to their maintenance check every month, and some of them, the seniors, have had to absorb $140 to $160 a month maintenance increase, and they have not been reimbursed by the state. I don't understand where the savings are. I have read that some of it was that the school districts wanted their money more up front. That makes no sense to me. This program has worked for 20 years, and on other, that it was going to be less expensive than the state, and that makes no sense to me because the state is saying that they're going to reimburse exactly the amount that they would have through their assessors. So I'd just like to know more about that.
Well, the first thing to be said is I think that there's a desire to end the program in the minds of certain individuals in public office. I don't want to identify them, let them publicly announce why they feel that way. When you look at how the STAR program benefits out in the state, Westchester County is far and away the single biggest beneficiary of it. We have the highest taxes and the highest school taxes, certainly for the purposes of STAR. We also have the highest values. And there's a great degree of resentment both in the city and in some of the poorer counties upstate that this program was created back in the mid-90s. It was a response to the cry for higher, to deal with higher school taxes. And so the program was created and it provided a benefit in that way. The change to the program that happened the last cycle was baked into the budget and started a process which, oddly enough, because at the same time on the tax cap, there was a desire to do rebate checks. At the same time, there was a desire not to do STAR payments up front and to turn that into a tax credit so that if you move from your existing unit or as